Hello, and welcome back to Redefine Parenting. I am Veenu Keller. I want to welcome you to Spanglish World Network and Her Network on Zingo TV, channel 250 and 251. Please remember to download both Zingo TV app on the respective app stores, iOS and Android devices. While you download, make sure to rate and leave a comment. This app is free. Zingo TV is also available on Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire Sticks, Roku Sticks, and also on all smart TVs going 216 and forward. So today I have a very special guest that I'm so excited to bring on. Her and I met a few years ago in the personal growth industry. And we've always had, I guess we're in a very similar niche working with kids. And I like our passion is to really help these kids flourish and thrive in their life. And as you guys know, I'm always saying, like, how do we give our kids a childhood they don't have to heal from? So I thought, there's a lot of things going on with schools at home, especially since, recovering from the whole COVID era. And hopefully I could say that. Hopefully that was just an era and we're moving past that. And one of the things that I reached out to my guest, Patty, who's here today, is in regards to some of the work that she's done, some of the special classes that she's been taking to really help kids change their mindset, to give them tools to get out of stress management and to really set the pace for how they're going to live their best life. And I know that Patty's been in the education world for a long, long time. And so before we were just chatting about like how she's helped kids like reframe the whole test anxiety and stuff. I'm like, yes, this is what we have to share for parents. So without further ado, let me just give the floor to my dear friend, Patty. Patty, welcome for being on Redefine Parenting and all the amazing tools you're about to help us bring to parents today.
Thank you so much. I'm a huge fan of your work, so it's an honor to be here. And I just hope that we can get these tools into the hands of more kids and teenagers, especially, so that they realize that they can get out of survival mode and actually thrive. It's not out of the question for kids to take what they've been through in the past couple of years and leverage it in a positive way and really use it to their advantage. So that's been a really exciting part of my work recently.
Nice. And I love how you say that, like, so they can thrive. Like, we really want to see our kids thriving, especially in our world right now. I mean, when I was growing up, and I make reference to this, like never in a million years would I have thought that the whole world would shut down, that I would see gas prices at $5 a gallon, that I'd be talking to you face to face on a video chat like the Jetsons, and here we are. And now we have to prepare our kids for what else is coming. And not only that, we have to prepare ourselves because we are the role models for those kids, right? So how we handle stress becomes their formula as well on how to handle stress. And so right now, more than ever, I feel like the work that you're doing is so, so important in this world and teaching our kids. What have you seen coming from being closed in, doing schools, homeschooling, if you would, to now going back into the education? Like, what do you see is like our biggest gaps right now for these kids? Because you and I were talking about how much kids are more stressed now than ever. So like, what are you seeing?
Some of the challenges I'm seeing are definitely just social skills, and it's not, it's just sort of a delay in the development of the social skills. They still have them, but when I talk to school guidance counselors and other teachers, they're saying that they're seeing behaviors and challenges that are almost 2 grades behind where they're used to. So if they're teaching 8th or 9th graders, they're seeing challenges that usually would present earlier in middle school. And a lot of the students themselves have told me that they are overwhelmed even being with groups of people or being where there's loud noises, because they've sort of adjusted to being more isolated and also having smaller spaces, quieter spaces. So they are starting to navigate all this external stimuli that they haven't had to in a couple of years. So when I ask the students what stresses them out, a lot of uncertainty. And it's also just adjusting from one environment to a completely different one, because we had to do that really quickly in March of 2020, right? We went from what we were used to home all the time. And that was
Right.
out of necessity. And the kids are telling me now that they don't feel that there's such an urgency. So they are hesitating to re-engage because they don't feel, they're not sure. As you said earlier, we hope it's over, but it's
Right.
still, there's still a lot of uncertainty.
And we've learned, you and I've learned from, the same mentor, and then like, the quality of our life is determined by the how much uncertainty we can handle in our life, and right now we are there. We are in the world of uncertainty. And you know what I'm seeing, because you and I have, we work with very similar, clients that, are going through a lot of challenges and stuff, like I have clients that are suicidal, you have suicidal ideations, that are cutting, that feel depressed, that feel anxious. I have parents writing me all the time that are like, my kid just is so anxious, and they never were like this before. But I think you hit on something, is like when we were in COVID in March 2020, our kids that were so external and the life of the party, they had to learn how to adjust their life by being by themselves. You
Mhm.
know, all these extrovert kids that thrive off of being around their friends and, going out and doing things, had to change the mindset, had to readjust what they were feeling, thinking, and even being now. And then we spent over a year and a half learning how to do that. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, pivot. Now we're going back to the external, stimuli out there. And now you need to like just go back to how you were, right? Like just go be the life of the party. And you're right, kids have stopped learning how to communicate face to face. And I personally see this, and I'm curious about you. Like when I'm on Zoom, no problem. Kids communicate with me. They can tell me things. They don't have their cameras off. They're great at communicating. And then I'll go see that same child face to face. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how are you? And they're like, fine. And like, what's going on? Like, this is not the same kid I coach every week. Like, what's going on? And he's like, I'm good. I'm good. Like, it's so good to see you. It's so formal. It's so distant. It's not that warm feeling of openness. Like, oh, I can tell Miss V anything. It's kind of like that closed off thing. And in my mind as an adult, I'm like, well, nothing's really changed. It's you, it's me, but it has changed. There's a whole screen, a whole universe in front of us that distance us. What's your take on that? Like, what are you seeing?
Very similar. I coach in person at my wellness center, and I coach online. And sometimes I have the opportunity for the two worlds to swap. And I'm definitely seeing the same thing. And I'm also blessed to be in schools almost all day, every day during the school year. So I have an opportunity to ask the students about that too, because I talk to them in school a lot about relationships, friendships, dating relationships. And they have really expressed that the comfort level that they have communicating digitally, even though they're doing it more face to face than via text message or Snapchat. In recent, uh, that's basically what they told me they've been doing recently, which is an evolution, because we know how much miscommunication happens when you're trying to do it through
Right.
text and Snap. So I'm happy that they're comfortable on video, but I had students that didn't even go back to school after schools opened up, because they were feeling such stress and anxiety with other people seeing them, and having to talk to people that they weren't comfortable with or that they didn't know, like that. There was no opportunity to shut the camera off once they got back in the classroom. So there's a new comfort zone that they are, many of them, not all of them, many of them
Right.
are struggling. A lot of them were enthusiastic to go back, but they're not, um, like you said, some of it has to do with introvert, extrovert, and some of it just has to do with the stories that they're telling themselves or that they've been told. So I think
Right.
one of the things that I see that's a promising pattern is that kids and teens who had parents and loved ones who told them a story that was more empowering seem to be embracing more uncertainty. So I
Yeah.
love to help them examine the stories that they're telling themselves, and then also be part of the rewriting process.
I love it. I love it. I used to have a template, if you would, that was called Real. And it's like rewrite, evolve, action, and live.
Ooh.
So, it was helping people rewrite that story because we are our own author. We can keep the same book and keep writing in the same book, or we can just say, okay, that was the final chapter, close that book. And what's the title of your new book? What's tomorrow going to look for you? And let's just start writing that new story now. But what a great pivot into what I want to do. Like, I want to help parents with some concrete strategies, which I know that you have some, in regards to mindset and habits and how to reduce the stress that they're feeling. So, so what, when you say mindset and habits, what specifically would you say are some things that parents might be seeing, and what can they do to shift that, reframe it, rewrite it, or whatever it is?
Um, I think one of the most important habits is cultivating a habit of calm because, I mean, we could take this from a few different angles, but ultimately, if a child or a teen or even an adult isn't calm or regulated, they're not using the logical, rational part of their brain. So one of the things I messed up a lot when I was a new teacher, and that I'm still working on as a mom, is there's so many times where I try to ration or reason with a student who is triggered or dysregulated, and then it gets frustrating for both of us because I want to help, and you can't rationalize or reason with somebody until they're calm. And so I mean, that's a neuroscience approach, but when you're when your nervous system's more regulated, you're more open to connection. So calming, then connecting, and then actually getting to the part where we
Yeah.
can rewrite the story. So I love to teach calming habits, really, to start there, to build that muscle and make that the new default.
So what
And
is, like, so there might be parents on here that's not understanding, what does regulate their system? What does that mean? Like, what does that specifically mean? And can you give like a couple of things, like, so a parent might not know, well, how do I know if my kid's regulated or not? And so, like, I can use like my twins as an example. Like, I have, my boy girl twin, they're going to be 10 next week. And
happy
they,
birthday.
yeah, right. They handle things very differently. Like, I believe that my son, he's like more emotional. Like, when he gets mad, I know he's mad just by him stomping up the stairs. But we have taught him that it is okay to feel what you feel. You have your room. Your room is your safe bubble. So when you're mad, you can't just walk off. You need to tell me, your dad, like, I'm mad right now. Okay, great. And go to your room, have your moment. And when you're ready to talk about it, you do. And like, even yesterday, my husband and I had just gotten back from an event that we were working at, and we were picking up the twins from my older son, and my twin got mad and he got so angry, and we're like, we're not going to have this. And he just needed time to calm down, to redirect his thoughts. And then he's like, okay, well, I'm sorry. And I said, are you sorry because you want the surprises that we got you? Or why are you sorry? And he's like, no, I'm sorry because I need to be sorry. I was talking back and I was rude. To me, that's regulation, right? Like, teaching them
Huge.
how to own their emotions, not wronging them for their emotions, not like, there's a boundary too. I'm not going to keep letting you yell at me because you're mad. Like, absolutely not. Like, my husband and I will both shut them down. Like, you will respect us, regardless of what emotion you're going through, you will respect us. However, we have taught them over the years to take time, own what you're feeling, whatever you need to do to solve and resolve it, and then come and talk about it.
I love that.
So,
And yeah, absolutely, you hit the nail on the head as far as regulation. When I talk to students and clients about it, basically we start at the level of, like, what are the things that push your buttons, to give them that level of awareness, because sometimes we aren't even fully aware of the things that
that's
cause
true.
us to have an emotional reaction. It could be a sound or a smell. And um,
Mhm.
one of the teens I work with pointed out the fact that sometimes we give more grace to animals because, if an animal is barking at a guy in a hat, we're usually like, oh, maybe a guy in a hat upset that dog at some point, and they're like, people do that too. It was like a great moment of connecting the dots, of
Good.
realizing that, um, you know, what dysregulates or triggers or bothers me, it may not bother anybody else, but
Right.
it's our responsibility, and this is the accountability piece too, is to explore that. And I love the practice that you have with your son. Like, it's okay to feel that, but you have to do it in a respectful way, and have the tools. And that's the part, like, his room is an incredible tool for him. And so a lot of getting kids to realize calming is just to know what pushes their buttons. And sometimes we joke around with siblings, especially like, what do your siblings do? Interestingly, the number one thing I hear from like hundreds of students is that they get really upset if somebody comes into their room and talks to them or does something and they leave and they don't close the door. Like, there's this massive
Wow.
door thing that I never would have guessed. Like, it just came from me asking enough kids what pushes their buttons.
Right.
And so we talk about the fact that, maybe one day they're going to have a roommate who either didn't have siblings or didn't have doors. And it's their responsibility to know, like, I need to communicate this because this is a need I have. And I, first of all, they need to manage their reactions so they don't react inappropriately, but
Right.
also to communicate that. So obviously we're going through a couple layers here, but once you can identify and realize, even just noticing it physiologically, like I'm starting to feel hot or tense, or my tongue is stuck to the roof of my mouth. So I love to teach them to do self check-ins, and
Okay. Well,
that's a big.
I'm gonna like I want, so because you're giving like golden nuggets here, guys. Like, you're
Sorry.
giving golden nuggets. So like, I just want to like get people, like, get some pen and paper and write this down. And by the way, we're streaming on live, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. So if you have any comments or questions for Patty or I, just go ahead and put them out there, and we'll see what we'll get to them. But so we need to learn how to regulate calm. So Patty's saying, what I'm hearing you say, Patty, is just ask them, like, what pushes your buttons, what triggers you, like, what are the things? Because we make so many assumptions of why our kids are mad or why our students are this or that. What we're not doing is getting curious, not critical. And I know you guys that are my listeners know I always say that: be curious, not critical. We have to get more curious right now to find out what pushes their buttons, to understand what's getting them in reactive mode and what's taking them out of calm mode. One of the things that I add, and I've done this with my son also, is I gave him a journal, and I called it his angry journal. I just called it what it is. Like, when you get mad, I want you to write down what made you mad. On the next page, I want you to write down what helped you calm down, because that way now we're getting his strategies, not mine. And then I also, what do you want to feel instead of mad? And he did, like, he would write down. And it's funny because he would always put his room is what was his thing that helped him calm down, just getting out of the situation. So we really want to look at, also helping kids to understand how to regulate them, is helping them understand what is their body. And you hit on this. What is their body feeling like when they're in that angst, when they're in that, discombobulation, if you would, that anxiety, that angst, that reactive feeling. What is their body feeling? What are they saying to themselves? Like, or what do they want to say to that person? Like, what is the language that they're saying? And really, what are they constantly focusing on when they are in this? So in order to regulate them, if we know those things, and then we go into calm, and when they're in calm, ask them the same questions. How does your body feel when you're calm? What are you doing? Notice your breathing. Do you feel tired? Do you feel happy? Like, is there an emotion you want to attach to it? What is the meaning you're giving it? Like, what are you saying to yourself? Like, am I saying, like, okay, I'm okay? I work with another twins, and she was afraid of the dark. And so I told her, I said, instead of running out of the room, when you go there, I want you to change your language to, I'm okay, I am safe. I'm okay, I am safe. Because if she's in the dark, she's okay and safe. She's constantly saying that, and she's pairing the two. She's now going to be able to duplicate that. When I'm in the dark, I'm okay, I am safe. And I'm going to tell you, within 4 weeks, she stayed alone in her room for the first time.
That's
That was
amazing. And I love the word safe, because that's our nervous systems for so long, especially in my own journey of learning how to manage my own stress and anxiety. I fought against how I was wired, right? Like, so a lot of the stuff that I thought was a problem for myself were actually just adaptations, because my nervous system was trying to keep me safe. So the fact
so
that
good.
you encourage that affirmation of safety, that has been in my personal journey and with all of my students such a big piece of the puzzle, because it's when we don't feel safe that we're dysregulated, right? So our nervous system will go on alert to keep us safe. We're wired for survival.
you and I both aren't like licensed therapists or anything like that. So I just want to like tell everybody like what Patty and I are sharing are through many, many hours and years of classes and experience and working in this field with, adolescent kids and younger kids. So I'm curious also about, you know, after regulation, like then what? Like once we know what triggers them, they know how to be calm, and then we go into what?
Relate or connection. That's the part where interpersonal connection is going to expedite the process. Um, Basically, helping them connect with something beyond themselves.
Right.
So I love the three-part connection: connection with yourself, with other people, and then with something bigger.
Mm.
And between that, within that trifecta is the place where they can feel the most safe, and that allows for the higher level, rational, reasonable growth to happen.
Right,
So
right. I love that. And you're right. The foundation is safety for all of us. It's like why I tell parents you have to put boundaries. I know it's a double-edged sword. And I mean, I was working with a client the other day and she was saying how her parent has no boundaries for her. It's not like, hey, did you brush your teeth? Did you take a shower? How's your homework? Without those questions. And even though these kids are independent, they're craving you to check in on them. They're craving that because it makes them feel safe. And I love what you said. And this is showing up a lot in my life. The whole, how am I making it mean to me? How am I making it mean about that person? How am I making it mean about, something beyond me or the world? And that's exactly what I do with my clients when we're really dissecting the issues or the challenges that they're really having, is going back to the meaning they're giving it about them. And then and they really get stuck on how others see them. It's that judgment aspect. And
and
then,
judging themselves. So
yeah,
many of the kids I work with, when we talk about judgment, it's not as much judgment of others sometimes as it is judgment of themselves. And
right,
that,
right. And then, so, and I will like caveat this too, because at least for me, because I felt judged by other people, that became my internal language as a child. And
yes.
so I judged me based off of what I felt people thought of me. And that played a huge thing. And so the judgment so much isn't them judging other people, it's how people are judging them and seeing them. And our brains don't want to lie to us. Our brains will always tell us the truth. So what we seek is what we find. And one of my personal coaches, she taught me, I think it's like over a year ago, she says, change what you see and what you see will change. And that's like a derivative of
Wayne Dyer.
Dyer's,
Yeah.
quote. And it's so true. And so I tell these kids, you know, what would you want to see differently in that person? Or what could you? Or what do you want to be seen as yourself? Because when we have parents that are like, my kid's just a brat, my kid's just a brat, and you look and you see your kid's a brat, why? Your kid is going to live up to that identity you're giving them.
Mm-hmm.
They are going to always be that brat because that's how they know that they connect with you. You're labeling them, you know? And so, take off the labels, put on better things to say. Like, you know what? That really was not a great choice. Like in our home, we've never made like you're a good girl or a bad girl. It's you did not make a good choice. So it's the choice that's labeled, not that child.
Yes, that's one of my favorite parts of your teachings, to be honest with you, because when I was a child, a, I could understand that there was a lack of logic between adults referring to me as stupid and me really excelling academically and being highly intelligent. And it just didn't make any sense to me. And then that was the turning point for me when I was like, I did something that wasn't smart. That doesn't mean I'm not smart. And so separating those two things was such a gift for me. So I love that you teach that. And I also love we're sort of talking about the fact that so many of us and young people especially need to be seen and heard. Usually it's one or a little bit more one or the other, depending on the child, but seen and heard to feel safe. And so I love that you're able to give them that gift of seeing themselves in different contexts, because if we get caught up in what we believe other people think, it's really hard to get out of that.
Right, right. So, okay, so we're at regulate. So regulate what triggers us and what makes us calm. And what was the other R?
Relate. So
Relate,
this is
relate.
I don't want to take credit for this one, so I'm just going to give a little pitch to Dr. Bruce Perry. He did the neurosequential model. So regulate, relate, reason is his baby, but it's served me so much in the work I do with teachers and students. So
I love it. So then, so we have regulate, we have relate. So relating to ourselves, that person, and something beyond us, which I think, by the way, is so important. We have got to teach our kids, and it doesn't matter what it is, like whether it's you're Christian, you're Jewish, I mean, I was raised Sikh, like it does not matter religion or spirituality. It's just saying there's something beyond us.
Mhm.
There's something beyond me,
Right.
and so they're getting out of that self-centered world that kids, I mean, our kids are like, you got to think, when you have a baby, when we had babies, our babies were like, the world revolves around me, and they're right. My world did revolve around them, right? And so it's transitioning them out of that to say, wow, there's a bigger picture out there than just me in this world. And I have to, and this is like where we teach them compassion and we teach them empathy.
Empathy. Yeah.
And we not only just teach them by our words, we allow them to see different parts of them. And that's another thing that I do when we talk about, the relate, is with my kids, when they do something, I'm like, that's what we call compassion. When you stepped up for that person and you complimented them and you cheered them on or you lifted them up, honey, that's compassion. So I'm relating what compassion is to what they're already doing. So they have absolute certainty. They know how to do it. They know what it feels like. So that was another thing that I feel like, if we can, when we're talking about relate, like how do we get kids to relate to what's going on, to the emotion and the things that we want to teach them.
Absolutely. And a big part of the relating too is allowing the adults in the equation, whether they're parents or teachers, to own compassion and empathy, not only to model it, but so that they don't take the child's behavior personally. I think
I
if
love
I could give one gift to any adult who works with young people, it would be to have this context so that the behavior wasn't taken personally, because then obviously the adult's going to get triggered and dysregulated, and it's really hard for it to go anywhere from that place.
I
So
love that. I love that. Don't take it personally. Don't. It's so funny. I tell kids, parents that too. It's like, my kid just told me for the first time they hate me. Or my daughter-in-law was telling me one day, she's like, your granddaughter just said that she hates me. And I'm like, oh, girl, let it go. She'll love you in a minute. She goes, no, like she was like adamant about it. And I'm like, and she'll be adamant about something else in a minute. Like in that moment, she speaks her mind, because she's almost 5. My granddaughter's almost 5. So she is like really just, they speak their mind. They don't know there's filters. They don't know there's a better way to tell mom that when you just told me no, I feel like you just took my whole life away because I could not have that popsicle or whatever it is, right? Because in their 5-year-old mind, that's all that they're focused on.
it
Okay.
happens with older kids too. My son's going to be 11, and I work with teenagers all day, every day, and it's that focusing on self a little more than the others and the bigger picture part, that
Right.
it just and it's so hard, because I remember the first time my son said something like that, and I was like, I cried, but
Me too. I'm not gonna lie. Me too. But I have 6 kids, right? And so somewhere along the lines, it's expected now. It's like if your
right.
kid's not hating you, you're not doing something right.
Actually, when I was a teacher, one of the veterans told me that's how they knew I became like that. I came into my own as a teacher, is when there was kids that hated me, and I was like, But it's similar, because they weren't hating me because of my instruction; it was because of my boundaries and my
Yeah,
expectations. And the same thing happens in the parenting realm too, for sure.
right. Okay, so I keep saying these over and over because I want people to really hit home.
Mhm.
So after so regulate, relate, and then the third
Reason.
R, reason. So
Reason's the ultimate goal, but so many times, and I know I did this, like if you've ever gotten into a discussion with somebody and they were not being logical, it's because they're in that fight or flight place and they can't use that part of their brain. But as a teacher, I used to say things like, you're not making any sense, or you're not being logical, and looking back now, I'm like, that's because they couldn't. Right.
Right.
But as
Right. I
a
mean,
parent, it's tough too because we're emotionally invested in our children and we have expectations. I know that's one of the things I have to work on as a mom is to meet my son where he's at sometimes and not where I think he should be. And so
I think
it's
that's all of our growth, though. I mean, even as teachers, as parents, as coaches, it's I've done a lot of work with Dr. Amen, and one of the most beneficial things that I did was his class on the adolescent brain, like and how it develops. And he's like, we are looking at our kids at 12 and 13 and expecting them to have the 48-year-old response or understanding. And he said, and this was brilliant, he's like, the reason why adolescents need us more than ever is because we are their frontal lobe.
yeah,
Their
the
frontal
prefrontal
lobe
cortex isn't
is
there yet.
not there. It's like when you look at like, serial killers and they have these big holes in their frontal lobes and stuff, like our kids do too. Not okay. I am not saying your kid's going to be a serial killer. So let me just be very careful about my language. But what I'm saying is, and this is just having fun, but we need to be that frontal lobe for our kids, right? So in their frontal cortex, because they don't have the long-term reasoning that we do as an adults. They can't future pace what it's going to look like if they keep making these choices. They don't have the executive functioning, reasoning, organization that we do. And so what's great about identifying that is like kind of like what you said, it's like seeing your son as an 11-year-old with 11-year-old brain making 11-year-old decisions
Mhm.
because it's in that moment. The reasoning comes in that moment, you
Right.
know. And if you're going to start to reason with a kid, you're going to lose. Like they cannot, conceptualize what you're talking about when we're like, if you do this, like I remember my mom saying, when internet first came out, and I was an adult even, she goes, be careful because what you put on that internet is always going to be there. Yes, and yes, I'm an adult now. My frontal lobe's developed. I get this. And yet, I didn't even take it really that seriously. Like I was like, oh, whatever, I delete it. And like if I can't find it, nobody else can find it again. And in all actuality, there was more intelligence behind the whole internet and what we put on there and stuff, And so
Mhm.
trying to get these kids to believe that too, just because it's on Snapchat doesn't mean that it's gone forever. Just because you can't find it doesn't mean it can't be found. And
We were
so,
blessed to have a school resource officer talk about the relationship they have with Snapchat and the fact that they can subpoena things. So they were developed enough to understand what a subpoena is, which is good.
nice, nice, nice.
Mm.
But going more back into reasoning, is it reasoning about the issue? Is it they're having justification for the reasons that they're using? Like, give us a little bit more of context of what that whole reasoning is.
Um, well, it probably is contingent on where they're at developmentally, but more in context with resolving a situation. So if there needs to be consequences or if there needs to be an explanation or whatever is age appropriate in that context, it needs to happen after calm and connection. So a lot of
Mm,
times I think as parents and teachers, we try to provide the explanation or we try to implement a consequence or whatever when they're still not yet calm. And we get frustrated when there's pushback or we get frustrated when they don't follow through on whatever the expectation was. So it's really just getting them as far as they can get developmentally
mm.
to understand a broader context, whatever that means to that.
So, and that makes sense too, because when we say to regulate and then relate was the second one, right? Like to
Yep.
relate it to something. And like, and that's probably why the work that this man has developed is related to something bigger beyond them. So they can, when they're going into reasoning, they can see a bigger picture and how it's connected outside of them
Right.
to a bigger aspect. So
And that
that,
will continue to grow as they develop. Like it may just be like that there are more popsicles, in the
right.
context of your granddaughter. But it's just so important that uh, especially when we're trying to help them understand something, whether it's a safety thing or just a interpersonal thing or how to communicate better, that we don't expect them to be able to wrap their heads around really anything until they're calm and they feel safe and connected. And then that's like from a teaching perspective, that's when the lesson could occur, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
So a lot of times, especially during COVID, since that's kind of where we started, going back to that, it was really hard for teachers to advance the kids academically because they weren't feeling regulated and they weren't feeling connected, because so much of what happens in a traditional education setting, I know that there's people who've been doing incredible things with homeschooling, so I don't want to discount that whole world, but from the public school world where I come from, the most successful teachers are successful because they develop relationships. And it's really hard to, it was hard, we're getting better at it, but to develop those relationships digitally when you have 30 kids on Zoom and they're all in different homes, which may or may not be safe. So
Right.
that was a lot that had to be taken into consideration teaching remotely. And getting kids to learn remotely is, in a classroom you can quickly create that calm and connection and then get into the lesson, but remotely sometimes the calm and the connection didn't happen at all.
Right. Right. So I'm curious, with going into the school system now, like where kids are and having to pivot, change the mindset, change the habits, right? Like,
Mhm.
uh, and all the stress. Like we, what I, what, how do teachers use this? How do we support our kids? Like with the stress. And I'm going to tell you, like the biggest stress. And when we were talking about test anxiety right before we got on this call, I was like, that is so pivotal because I had that and I probably still do have that. And I know kids have that. I mean, I say all underline of the clients that I work with that are like middle school, high school, their biggest challenge is testing. And what I try to tell them, and I would love to hear what you say, but I say to them that your test that you're taking does not determine if you're smart, if you should pass, if you're worth it. It is testing on information that was taught to you. And it's asking in certain ways to see if you understand the aspects of the way that they're asking. It has nothing to do with anything else. Because kids take this test. When I ask them, I'm like, what does the test mean to you? And they're like, oh, I'm going to fail the class, or my mom's going to kill me, or it means that I'm stupid. I'm not going to pass that class. I'm going to have to go to summer school. And they make up all these different meanings about it.
Stories.
But what does testing really mean? And so through the dialogue of understanding really what is a test on. So, like, say it's a history test, I'll say, tell me what you're being tested on. And they'll just blurt it out. And I'm like, it seems that you know. And they're like, I do. And I'm like, so when you get the test, what happens? They're like, I don't know. Like my mind goes blank. I said, because what are you now focused on? They're like, am I going to fail? Am I going to pass? Do I know this? So their mind is clouded with all what's going to happen versus being resourceful in answering the questions. So I would love to hear your take on this because what are the strategies? Like, what am I doing wrong? What am I doing right? How can I make it better for these clients because they are going through this?
What you're doing is wonderful, but I'm going to add sort of a nerdy brain science component. And I
Love
think
it.
part of what this does when I explain it to students and teachers is it interrupts the pattern a little bit and gets them to look at it from another perspective. But I just had I trained a school district. It was K through 12, and we had this conversation, and the superintendent was in with me, and he said that he had sort of his own perception of test anxiety and the fact that it seems to be getting more prevalent, and that this explanation really helped him. So when I'm talking to my students, we actually do it in the same conversation with what their hot buttons or their triggers are, like the things that drive them nuts, because we talk about the fact that once you get stressed out or dysregulated, that you
Mhm.
can't think clearly because you go into that sort of caveman part of your brain. So that's more of a fight or flight reaction. So they realize that although we're wired for survival, we've evolved. So even at their age, they don't have the prefrontal cortex that you and I have, but their executive functioning has evolved from the time of cavemen. So
Good to
I
know.
kind of I kind of really dumbed down the neuroscience. So if there's any neuroscience people watching this, I just hope you don't mind me pattying it up a bit. But the kids really respond, and it was probably one of the most teachable moments when I shared this with an at-risk student too, because a lot of my students who struggle with fighting and behavioral stuff. I had a student, the teacher told me that he was the worst kid in the class and in the school. And he was only in ninth grade. So
Oh, that
I'm
makes
sort
it
of
hard,
facetious sometimes. And I'm like, how do you get that kind of credit in ninth grade?
right? That's so funny.
So anyway,
Nice reframe.
yeah, well, I love kids because if they struggle at that level, I know there's a story there and that they need tools. And that's why I do what I do. So as I was explaining this to the whole class, I wasn't just talking to this kid. I watched the light bulb go off because I was saying when you get really stressed out or anxious or angry, that the smart part of your brain gets unplugged because then you go back into the caveman part and you have the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, kind of all the things that start with F. And until you can calm yourself down and get regulated, that's the only way to get that smart part plugged back in.
Mm,
And then when we pivot to the test scenario, we talk about the fact that, like you said, they studied, they paid attention. I always tell them it doesn't work if you didn't pay attention in the first place. But if they can have a conversation with me about the content and I know that they know it, but then the test lands on their desk and their minds go blank, I bring it back. I'm like, well, what part of your brain do you think the answers live in? And they're like, the smart part. And they're like, yeah, because cavemen weren't taking tests. I was like, so what do you think happened when the test landed on your desk? And they said, oh, I probably got stressed out because I was telling myself one of those stories. So it's exactly what you were just saying. But once I start telling myself that I'm going to fail the test and fail the class and my mom's going to kill me and my life's going to be over, you're so far into fight or flight that you can't get the smart part plugged back in.
I love
And
that.
so they're like, oh, so when the answers disappear, it's really, and I need to calm down because once I calm down, it'll plug back in and the answers are there. I'm like,
Mm,
yeah. So it's kind of Socratic the way that I deliver it, but it's also helping them. It empowers them to know that there's nothing broken, right?
right.
It makes complete sense that they would do that. So back to my um, at-risk student that got the label at a precarious age. Um, he stayed after class. Like he came up and talked to me and he's like, first of all, you made me think really hard. I think my brain hurts. But second of all, thank you. Like he had gone through his entire life with lots of trauma, big T and little t trauma his whole life. And so his nervous system was reacting in this fight response constantly, and he felt like he had no control over it. And he thought there was something broken or wrong. Like he didn't know that when people get triggered or angry that they feel it physically. He thought it was just him. So
Mm,
having this conversation was such a gift because it empowered him to realize. I told him it wasn't a get out of jail free card. I said, you can't
right.
punch somebody in the face and be like, my brain was unplugged.
Right.
But he's
Oops.
like, it was just an opportunity for him to create a new story and be like, this is why this is happening and I have some control over it.
Right.
And, diagnoses aside, obviously there are people
Right.
who need other help um, with this, but in general, when we get into that stressed out place, if we have some simple tools, whether it's breath work or, anything that brings us into the present moment. So I taught them starfish hand. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Well,
I could
let's do it. Let's see it. I would love it.
Fish hand. This is mainly for little kids, but then I started telling the high schoolers about it, and they loved it too. So, to get out of stress, we talk a lot about the fact that many of the things that stress us out are things that have happened in the past or things that are going to happen in the future, that uncertainty or that response to what happened. So I encourage them to have different strategies to come into the present moment. We also talk about, you mentioned technology earlier and why it's challenging for this generation to be present since there's so many readily available distractions.
Mhm.
But I tell them not to overcomplicate it, that it can just be using your five senses, right? Anytime you're really focused on your listening, they tell me music is one of the
Yes.
universal things for the
Yes.
kids that they can use that to calm. So that's a tool that many of them use, or a lot of them like those satisfying sounds, the ASMR videos. Those don't work for me. So we also talk about the fact that it's not universal. What works for me may not
Right.
work for you. But they love this idea of using their five senses and doing simple little things. So starfish hand combines breath work and the tactile sensation. So
Okay.
the way it works is that you trace your hand is the starfish because
Hmm.
5 points. So you trace your hand, and as you trace up, you breathe in, and as you trace down, you breathe out. As you breathe in and breathe out.
Okay, we were just breathing, everybody, just so you know.
Yep.
We took 5 inhales and 5 exhales.
Yep, just deep. And you could teach breath work in a bajillion different ways, but for little kids, they can get the visual of the
I
starfish,
love
they
it.
get the tactile, and usually in 5 deep breaths, it brings enough of a calm to start getting that executive
Mm,
functioning back and to reframe things and just to find the pause.
right.
And I love that. And the reason I started telling or showing the high schoolers is because I was able to do an assembly in an elementary school, and they were a lot of students that had big challenges. And when they did starfish hands, quite a few of them fell asleep. And that was a beautiful indicator that their nervous systems were just really overstimulated. So as soon as they felt regulated and safe, they went to sleep.
I love that. And so again, I think, bringing it back full circle, it's how do we get our kids to feel safe? When
Mhm.
our kids feel safe, they thrive. When we feel safe, we thrive. And safety isn't just physical safety, it's safety in knowing you're not going to be wrong. It's safety in knowing that you're not going to be judged. Like there's so much safe work that, we need to do now. I mean, and I'll tell you, and I mean, we're living in a world like when I went to school, I never thought that there would be a school shooting. Like that would just never even, and now we're there. And so like it adds to the stress of our kids, when after what just happened in Texas, um, I was having a discussion with my kids. It's like, I don't want to have this discussion with my kids. And now I need to, you know, let them know that they're loved, and I need to let them know what they can do to protect themselves. And I need to let them know, why would somebody do that, mom? Why? And I have to hallucinate of why somebody would do that. And we have to, I've created the conversation that I never thought I'd have to create with my kids. I mean, at elementary school level, like this should not be what we're discussing with our kids. And I think that starfish hand is so amazing because in any area, if something happened, at the event I was just at, Joseph McClendon III was sharing about a story when he was on an airplane, and he looked out the window, and the engine was on fire and everybody's panicking and stuff, and he said nobody was calm, and so nobody could think what next to do. It's, you got to go into that calm, and it goes right back to what you said, is regulate. Find your calm. Help your kids find their calm.
And do it
Like,
together. Co-regulation is actually one of the fastest and most effective things. So as I evolved, I went from like, what's wrong with you, to realizing that breath would help. So I would encourage students to be like, you should breathe. And now I'm at the breathe with me place, because when you do it together, it mirror neurons, but also just the act
right?
of connection. So you can regulate and relate at the same time.
I love it. I love it. And I'll tell you, like so my kids have been diagnosed with dyslexia and ADHD, and especially in the afternoon, like my husband and I, we do part supplements and part medication, and in the afternoon, everything is wearing off. It's the end of the night, and we made a conscious choice that no, we don't. We're not going to. We want their body to come down and be who it needs to be in the evening, because we want them to get a good night's rest, right? We don't want them to be overstimulated. And so we taught them, we said, show me calm. We didn't say be calm. We say, show me calm.
Yes. I
And
love that.
both twins know, they'll like, one of them, the boy, he kind of gets a little, theatrical, and he'll go like this. He'll sit on the floor, cross his legs, and take a deep breath in and close his eyes. You know what? The action of him doing all of that, though, is really helping him regulate. It's giving him conscious focus on, I got to focus on what's calm. Right. And so, my husband and I, if we're in public and they're being a little rambunctious, I'll be like, show me calm, show me calm. And they'll go into just taking a breath, you
Yeah.
know? And if they go right back into hyper, I'm like, show me calm. And I keep telling them that until we can get them to take enough breaths. Because if they could take a breath and be calm, then they have a clear path to really make a better decision on what they're doing right now versus getting in trouble because they're not listening.
And it builds the muscle too. So we all have a default setting, right? And the more you practice and the more they show you calm, the more that's going to be their default. Like worry is a default setting too. That's a story that we create a habit from.
Right.
So they're building the habit of calm just by showing you that regularly. And, just like we brush our teeth without thinking about it, we can go to the calm place without thinking about it. It just requires, I know when I did that rewiring work for myself, I had to set reminders on my phone. My phone still goes off that says drink water and breathe like 10 years
I
later
love it.
because
I had, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
no, it's just that you got to anchor it. So I had those little star stickers, at the dollar store. There's one on my laptop, one on my phone, one on my steering wheel. And every time I saw one of those, it was my cue to do a check-in and breathe. Like I had to do it consciously because you can't just take 3 deep breaths and have a new default setting.
I had a alarm set on my phone to go off every hour, and it said gratitude. And I remember we were shopping last year, Christmas shopping, and we were at like Hobby Lobby or something. And I had my 2 stepdaughters with me and the twins with me, and the alarm went off, and I'm like, "Stop! Everybody, find something to be grateful for right now." And my kids are looking at me, and I'm like, "Find something." I'm going to ask you guys. I'm going to ask you guys in the car. Tell me, what were you grateful for? And so, and then we were like driving, and then we went to a restaurant, and the alarm went off. I'm like, "Stop! Find one thing to be grateful for. I'm going to ask you, what are you grateful for?" And it got to the point where, like, the next day, they would say, "When's your alarm going to go off? When do we get to be grateful
Yes.
for something?" Just by doing it all day because we were with each other, we were shopping, we were eating lunch and stuff. And again, it's that reminder of, to be grateful. And I like even incorporating that, like to breathe, like turn that alarm on that needs to go off 10 minutes. And it also gives you that moment where you realize that you're connecting with yourself, and we
100%.
need to teach our kids this. This is what our kids need to get better habits, to have a better mindset, and to get out of stress. Stress is the number one killer. Like, it really is. Stress is the number one killer, and it really takes us from being our best selves. It robs us. It's the thief of our energy. It's the thief of our joy,
Our
and it's
relationships.
our relationships, and it's the thieves of ourselves.
Mhm.
So, so we're almost done with this. What are some, like, 2 top nuggets that, if you can share with our listeners today, if they remember anything, what would you want them to remember?
Um, just to be intentional. One of the things we do to start our day every day is we listen to the SpongeBob Best Day Ever song, and we just set the intention to have a good day. Not every day is a good day, but it's that the way you frame things, right? So just what you do with the gratitude, that's how we end our day. So we start with intention and end with gratitude, but to realize that it's the little things that make the difference, like the connection, the taking time. Calm isn't just something that you do in a yoga class, right? It's something we can create habits and practices out of. And from that place, that's where we can grow and thrive and do all the things that we want for our kids.
Right. So thank you so much, Patty, for sharing with us how to regulate, relate, and reason. Did I get those 3 right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Dr.
Yay.
Perry was super
This is
proud.
great. This is great. So, you know, it's so important that we're doing this with our kids right now. I just want to leave everybody with saying, be curious, not critical. Create that open, safe, and trusting space for your kid to speak to you, to share with you without judgment. And you have to realize that we as parents, we want to have all the answers, but we don't have all the answers. It's time that we start asking our kids, what do you want? What does that look like? If I was going to do that for you, what would you want me to do differently?
Yes.
And so by asking these questions, we get into their world and they allow us into their world. The more curious we are and the less critical we are. So thank you guys so much for tuning in for another episode of Redefine Parenting. This show can also be heard on Spanglish Radio Network. Please check out spanglishworld.ca for all your news and programming. Spanglish World, watch it, hear it, read it, download it, and live it. Thank you again. See you next week.
Thank you so much.